We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast, second half of the Ed and Rational Boomer podcast. And Ed, you wanted to bring up somebody, a name that I'm not familiar with. Maybe you can tell me what you're talking about here.
All right. Well, we were talking about Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, who is arguably the worst idea for a Speaker of the House in the history of the country. There may have been a few worse ones way back or something, or mid 1800s around in there.
Yeah,
But this guy's a special case because what he really wants to do is create a theocracy. That is his goal. He believes the world's 6,000 years old and it's going to end tomorrow, so you don't have to worry about the environment or anything like that, and that this country should be, quote, a Christian nation, which, that no other religion should have any standing or anything. And when we see this happen, anytime this happens, two things happen. Number one, women are subjugated. They're not allowed to be in business or be lawyers or be anything or go to school.
right.
Just check out any of the Islamic countries and you see what he has in mind for this country. They started it by repealing Roe v. Wade. They'll try to do other things along those lines. They'll try to get rid of birth control. They'll try to get rid of interracial marriage, certainly gay marriage, or any LGBTQ rights or anything like that. That's all going to go by the wayside if they had their way, right?
Right.
And they want it written into the Constitution that we're a Christian nation. Now, Johnson has been at this for a long time. He's closely associated with Ham, the guy who owns the Ark and the Creation Museum and all of that bullshit that sucks money out of Kentucky. But it's all based on the work of this, quote, historian named David Barton. Now, he has bunches of books out there claiming that the founding fathers wanted a Christian nation. He makes up quotes, he steals quotes, he his own publisher pulled one of his books because it was so full of misinformation they couldn't possibly defend it. But they should have pulled them all because they're all bullshit. Yet they're constantly used across the country in all kinds of cases where book banning and anything like that comes up. They'll bring in Barton or they'll bring in his writings to support this stuff because a lot of people just don't know, and this they'll have competing things. This guy went to Oral Roberts University. He got a Christian education bachelor's degree. That's his only credential. He is not a historian. Nothing he says is true. And anytime you hear that name, David Barton, you know it's a scam. So write that down. David Barton, any book that has his name on it is a piece of crap. Anybody who espouses what David Barton says is also a piece of crap. So there, I just wanted to get that out there.
Well, there you go, Ed. You screwed up another potential sponsor for the show. I don't think he'll be calling now. Mike, would you sell my book? Do you want to interview me?
Yeah.
I get people all the time that will say, "Can I come on your show? Because I wrote a book." And I go, "What's the book about?" And it has nothing to do with what we talk about on the show. And I say, it's really not my thing. I'd rather have listeners on, and I'm not looking to sell books and all that stuff. But he's an author. And I told one guy, I go, any motherfucker can write a book. I could write a fucking book full of nothing.
I wrote one.
You did write a book? Well, I know you were talking about it.
Yeah.
What's the book about?
Yeah, I've got it. It's about Shakespeare.
Can you buy it?
Sort of. No, I haven't published it yet.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's kind of a, for want of a better word, it's kind of a Harry Pottery kind of thing. I mean, it's a fantasy, and the central thing of it is that Shakespeare was stolen by fairies, raised as fairy prince, and the changeling, a guy named Bertie Capers, was put in his place, and then they come together and come to the New World and invent America. That's what it's about.
See, I thought when you said you did a thing on Shakespeare, I thought you were talking about the years when you and Shakespeare were in high school together, because you're old.
We had a falling out.
Well, since you're a learned guy and I'm not, there's all kinds of, and you wrote the book on a fantasy book on Shakespeare. What do you think about Shakespeare? Was he really one guy? Was he a bunch of guys? Was he a royalty? Was he a rapist? What do you know about? Is there any way we ever find out who Shakespeare really was, or if he was?
I don't see how. I think there's a cottage industry in who the hell was Shakespeare, right?
Yeah,
All of these books and suppositions and so forth. I tend to go with the idea he was one guy, and that he was pretty talented, but he was also really good at stealing shit. I mean, if you look at his plays, a lot of them are he went back and found stories, and then he embellished them, but he had a really good ear for dialogue and poetry and so forth. And I think we see, look at Bob Dylan. Here's a
yeah,
guy, an inexhaustible source of tremendous lyrics, right?
right.
And others I can think of who do that. Well, why is it such a stretch that a guy back then could do essentially the same thing, especially when he had classical books to draw on?
True.
And a lot of his plays are based on classical works that he just kind of quote updated. The histories were there, and a lot of them he wrote simply to flatter the people who had money. I mean, he wrote a play about Richard III making Richard this horrible villain, disfigured creature when he was just trying to please his patron who came after Richard. So yeah, he was a guy who would have fit right in Hollywood today. I guarantee you.
Well,
But
how
I love his stuff. I'm not big on the histories, but I really dig his the way he writes and what he writes.
But what you said he's a pretty good writer, uh, uh, and
Yeah,
he knows something about dialogue and has an ear for dialogue. What is
yeah.
it that has caused him to rise above every other writer in the history of writers? I mean, you
Prestige.
haven't said it.
No.
You haven't. Was it when he came out and what he was doing when he came out? He was ahead of time, or what?
No, the work speaks for itself. His stuff is good, and if you actually sit down and read it or see a good production of it, then you will see that it is for the ages. I mean, um, this is what I tell people: if you can't understand Shakespeare, you can't understand the Bible. Certainly not the King James version, anyway, because it's written in the same way, very much so. Now, was he one guy? I don't know. There's plenty of references to him, and we know that he had it. That he was well known in his time. We know where he came, where he was born, what his father did, and so forth. And I think the big thing is people go, well, he only had a grade school education at that time, and so forth. Well, there's autodidacts walking around everywhere. I mean, I didn't have a super great education, but I'm fairly articulate. I know plenty of other people that are the same way. If you've got talent, you've got talent. And he had it in spades,
Yeah,
probably the best. But it didn't hurt that the English tradition moved to America.
right.
He's probably not nearly as big in China as
Probably
he is
not.
here.
Uh,
I could be wrong. I know the Japanese used some Macbeth. Became Throne of Blood, the Kurosawa classic. So there's, it's a worldwide thing to a certain extent, but his poetry is excellent. Um, some of the jokes don't play anymore, but jokes from 1930 don't play anymore either.
Right.
So it's
Some of the jokes from the first half of this podcast wouldn't play anymore. So that
that's
we got
true.
that. We got,
That's probably true.
the funniest quote.
I'm a fan. I'm a fan, so
Okay.
don't ask me. Yes, but that's why I think they're still around. I like some of the plays better than others. My favorite is *Midsummer Night's Dream*. Always will be.
Yeah.
Um, I've committed a lot of it to memory just because I like it.
Wow. See, I'm not that sophisticated. I think I can quote some stuff from Tombstone and Dazed and Confused, but that's about the extent of it. The funny thing about it's an interesting comparison you make from Shakespeare to Bob Dylan. It's kind of interesting because he
Yeah.
was pretty well raised up for his writing, and people really bought into everything he said in the '60s. I remember him being interviewed one time, and I don't know if he was just fucking with the guy or he was serious. But if he was serious, it's kind of disappointing. This guy sat down and said, uh, "You're the voice of a generation. You say the things that need to be said in such a way. It's amazing. How do you do that?" And he looks at him and he goes, "This stuff doesn't mean anything. It's just words I think sound good together." And with Bob Dylan, you don't know if he's just fucking with you or he really means it. There's got to be a certain amount of depth to Bob Dylan to write these things. It's just not by chance that he writes the things he does and they mean what they mean. But I think he gets tired of being the current day Shakespeare and he just wants to live his life. But I don't think Bob Dylan has a huge education either. He went to high school. I don't know that he went to college. It is something that's innate in some people. It's kind of like
Hmm.
the old soul we have on here. Um, they
Yeah.
call her old soul because she does seem to be an old soul. She's a 43-year-old woman that has incredible wisdom. And I think people are just born with a certain amount of wisdom and intelligence, and you either have it or you don't. And you can go to school. Because I know a lot of people that have master's degree that are dumb fucks.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And my wife did not go to college, but she has. She's the smartest person I know, and is more in-depth knowledge of almost everything than I do because she's an autodidact and everything sticks. Plus, she has this super rational mind, and both sides work. She's creative, and she has a right brain and a left brain. They were both cooking. You
Right,
know.
right,
Um, and I know plenty of people who have master's degrees and doctor's degrees and PhDs who are just dumb fucks. Sorry,
right, right. Well,
but they are. I mean, look at Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz went to Harvard Law School. Can you believe that shit?
yeah. Well, my wife has a master's degree. She was a teacher and she has a master's degree. And I majored in beer in my 1 year of college, and I'm way smarter than my wife.
Yeah.
I don't think she's here. That's good. But
Yeah.
no, it's not even a matter of smarter. It's just having an interest. I mean, education is a good way to set the tone for your life, but you've got to stay. If you want to do anything in life and you want to have any kind of intellect, all you have to do is stay curious. Be curious about everything and look
Yeah.
into things. And that's one of the problems we've had with the media. Most people aren't curious. They just want it thrown in their lap and then they can eat it up like they're at a buffet. They don't look deeply into what it is they're being fed. And if someone is curious and they're curious enough to look into things, uh, you're going to learn along the way over and above what you did in high school and
Yeah.
college and you know your master's degrees or anything like that. We all have the capability and we all have the opportunity to learn. It's just a matter of if you choose to do it.
Well, Shakespeare's method too. He didn't sit alone in a room with a quill and write this stuff. He was producing plays. He had a company of actors. I tell people Shakespeare was probably a lot like Count Basie. He had a band,
Right.
and the music that came out that has Count Basie's name on it probably had a lot of the instrumentalists in his band also contributed. I think the actors in Shakespeare's troupe also contributed. He had Richard Burbage and he had Kemp and he had others that were, one was the leading man, the other was the clown and so forth. And you see these cropping up in all his plays here and there. There's
Yeah.
always the clown. There's so I think they probably had some input too. I think it was probably more of a communal thing. putting these all together. And these were working actors, and he was a working playwright. They had to make a living, so they were trying to do. He'd throw some stuff in for the people who paid a penny and stood down front, and he'd throw in some poetry for the queen who was sitting in the back behind the screen. So they're a very ecumenical kind of way of creating things. So, and Bob Dylan probably the same way. He liked working with the band because and I'm sure they contributed to some of his stuff in different ways.
Well,
So who knows,
one
how it was
example,
done.
one example that might be a similar example to what you're suggesting with Shakespeare. And I know there's going to be freaks out there that mad at me about this, but I know by direct connection to this that, you have somebody in Minnesota like Prince. He was
Right.
absolutely amazing, one of the most talented people in the history of music. Not many rock stars did all the things he did and as well as he did. He was he was a phenomena with almost every instrument. He was great at everything. However, when you write as much music as he did, he was also a sponge. He sucked up a lot of stuff, and it wasn't just R&B and funk.
Yeah.
Maria Moldauer, Midnight at the Oasis. Uh, he picked up a lot of stuff, and I remember talking to people who were either in his band or in a band connected to him, and the running joke was, be careful what kind of riff you're playing when he comes in, because it may end up in his next hit song. And I'm not suggesting that Prince stole anything or had to steal anything, but some people just soak up everything. I mean, we hear about Robin Williams, most beloved comedian ever. He's also known to have stolen so many jokes, and nobody held him accountable because they knew he wasn't doing it purposely. He was just soaking shit up, and it became part of him. And that's what I would suggest maybe happened with Prince to a certain extent. Certainly, he had the capability to do it all on its own, but anytime you do something, that's why I like doing the podcast with you or listeners. It adds a whole different dimension when you get a collaboration as opposed to just one guy shoving the same shit down your throat.
Well, I think it was Kurt Vonnegut who said, "Everybody steal from the best."
Right,
So
right.
I stole that from him, actually.
There you
But
go.
no, it's true. And people don't always know they're stealing either.
No,
You hear something and it goes in one ear and it percolates back there, and it may come out different but the same. So who knows? I still tend to think Shakespeare was one guy, very talented one, who had a lot of influences and worked with a lot of different people to come up with what he put out there. But it stands alone. I mean, you can take a Shakespeare play and give it to somebody who's never read one before, and I think they'll get from it, if they're literate to a degree, they'll get from it something. Wow, this is some pretty good stuff.
right.
All the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players, and so forth.
I,
I mean,
I think when it comes to creativity, there's a certain amount of kismet involved. It has to be the right thing at the right time in the right situation that just hits. And inevitably, any of us do anything, we're going to get a little bit of kismet in this whole thing because something will hit at the right time. You go on TikTok and you see these people that are absolutely viral and have millions and millions of followers, and you go, how did that happen? Because they aren't
yeah,
really doing that much, but it was just the right time, right situation, right feel, everything. It just happens. There are going to be those types of things. Shakespeare, Prince, Bob Dylan for that matter. It's going to happen every so often.
yeah. Well, we solved that. So
Well, well, no, now that you're talking about influences, the question really is Donald Trump influenced by Adolf Hitler? Now, I did a TikTok on this and I mentioned Adolf Hitler, and they quickly took down the audio. They didn't take down the whole
right.
video, just the audio. Why would you just take down the audio? If you're gonna take down the audio, that's all I got. You might as well take the whole fucking thing down. But Donald Trump went on and um, said that immigration is poisoning the blood of our country. I won't say it's a direct quote from Adolf Hitler, but it's about as fucking close as you can get, and it's it's more intellectually put together than I would imagine Donald Trump would have the capability to put together. He doesn't talk like that. So he had to
Right,
be
but you know
influenced
who
by something.
does?
Oh,
You know who does? Stephen, what's his face? The
right.
bald-headed little slinky.
Stephen Miller.
I call him Stephen Miller. And you know he's a fan of Hitler, and you know he knows all the speeches, and you know he hand feeds his stuff to Trump. He's the constant. I mean, Ivanka and Jared aren't around anymore, and Mark Meadows isn't around anymore. But guess who's sitting right by him? Stephen Miller. He's
Well,
always been the power behind the throne, so to speak.
and you know all any clever quip or any comment that seems to be cognizant uh, came from somebody else. Donald Trump just flails
Yeah,
anytime he talks. He's just coming off the top of his head, coming out of his ass, saying anything. And that's what people have to understand. And what I've said all along, Donald Trump may not have been as evil as he appears now when he first went into office. I just think there are people around him saw an opportunity because he was so easily manipulated. All you have to do is kiss him on the cheek, pat him on the butt, and tell him he's a genius, and he'll fucking do and say anything for you. And then he gets caught up in all this, and now he's truly fucked because he is so easily manipulated. And I think there was a lot of outside people that influenced everything he said and he did. And he was only concerned with getting votes and getting money, so he was willing to do anything.
absolutely. I think he started off. I'm going to enhance my brand a little bit by running for president. I'll stick in it for a while and make some noise and so forth. And, maybe I'll get another TV series or something.
Right,
That's
right.
what he had in mind, and then suddenly it takes off and he's got the nomination. And once he was in there, I think he looked around and he saw Kim Jong Un and the various Putin and the various strong men, and he saw himself in that same light. That was what he wanted to be. He wanted to have that kind of power, that kind of people hanging on his every word and standing and at attention whenever he walked in the room and that sort of thing. We saw it happen before our very eyes. He became this authoritarian or wannabe before our very eyes. And anyone who can't see that is just choosing not to. They're just being willfully blind.
With all this stuff coming out, the Colorado thing, I think the Colorado disqualifying him from the ballot is kind of freaking him out a little bit. Going to the Supreme Court, not getting any help. The Washington D.C., the Georgia thing. Fonnie Willis just talked to. They said, "Do you think Donald Trump will go to jail?" And she basically said, "You've seen the charges. These are serious charges. He'll be treated no differently than anybody else, meaning if he's convicted, he'll go to jail." So, um, with all this going on, and I've said this too about him, he's 77 years old. He's not in the best physical or mental health. Um, this has got to be weighing on him and taking its toll. It would on the average person. The question is he getting that wear and tear from all this shit hanging his head, or is he just so absolutely delusional he still thinks he's winning? Because he's definitely
I think
not.
he's I think he's absolutely delusional, and there's no one who's going to tell him.
Right,
Um,
right,
the,
true.
the the people that are still around him are nothing but enablers, and they hope, they're praying that he gets back in so they don't have to suffer, because the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Mark Meadows, the Steve Perrys, all of these people know that if Trump falls, they fall, because Jack Smith isn't going to quit just when he gets Trump.
No, 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 no.
Once he's on the scent, I mean, I think he's going to, every one of these people, Gozar and Trump and all of these people and Biggs and who I mean, all of these all these enablers are going to go down too. Some of them will go to jail, some of them won't, but I mean, some will be given immunity for testifying and so forth, but still a large number of them they have cast their lot with Trump, and they are on that ship that is going down eventually.
Well, a lot of people are complaining about when is he going to get the members of Congress? When is he going to get Ginny Thomas and Roger Stone and all this stuff? And I there's no question that they're going to have to get indictments and they're going to go after him. But I think he's so laser focused, and he's right to think that getting Donald Trump straightened away is the only thing that's really time sensitive. Because
Uh-huh.
if you can cut off the head of the snake, the other shit will just fucking die. And that's what's going to
Yeah.
happen to these other people once Donald Trump is done. They have no chance at this point. So it's conceivable that if we start this trial in March and it ends in June, those people in Congress may not even get indictments till after the trial because that
I
would
think
have some.
not.
And I think that angers people, but you have to trust Jack Smith. He's been pretty solid down the line, and he's going to maximize the accountability for these people in Congress. So if you're worried about when they're going to get the people in Congress, it could happen tomorrow. It may not happen till June after this particular trial. So don't worry about it. Just let's focus on Donald Trump. And I think that's what Jack Smith is doing because he sees that as the biggest danger coming up toward the election.
The Thank goodness for Jack Smith. Merrick Garland was a disappointment, but at least he appointed Jack Smith.
Yeah, you got to give him credit for
And
that.
I don't know why. I tend to think he did not want to be seen as someone who would seek revenge because of what Mitch McConnell did in blocking his ascension to the court, to the Supreme Court. Which is too bad. I wish he'd come in with a sense of vengeance and just wiped them clean. But for whatever reason, he did not. And I wonder if Joe Biden won't replace him in a second Joe Biden administration. And I
Well, he
wonder if he wouldn't just tender his resignation and go.
yeah, he might.
We need a Fannie Willis or somebody like that in there to really go after the. Actually, I would choose if it were up to me and she was willing. I'd go with Amy Klobuchar. I think she would be an excellent
Yeah.
um, attorney general.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are a lot of better choices than Merrick Garland. And it's not that Merrick Garland doesn't know what he's doing. It's just that he's too bureaucratic. He's just
And
he wants to play by all the rules and keep everybody happy. And unfortunately, when we're dealing with criminals, you can't try to keep them happy. You need to nail them, get it done, and get it out of the way and move down the line if we want to progress at all.
yeah, and you have to remember that Obama chose him because he thought it was somebody that he could get through. That
Right.
had that was had an even hand, but he's a member of the Federalist Society, I do believe.
Yes, he is.
I
He
could
is.
be wrong on that. I thought so. So that tells me something very telling. Anyone who's a member of the Federalist Society, I don't trust.
Well, who's head of the Federalist Society? Isn't that Leonard Leo? Who's obviously a corrupt
Yeah.
motherfucker because he's basically a
Yes.
pimp to the Supreme Court justices. But
Exactly.
didn't you find this interesting, this story that we heard about Clarence Thomas way back when, around 2000? He was getting a little tight for money. He went to a congressman, we don't know who it is, and says, "Listen, man, I'm struggling here. I need to make fucking more money than this, or I might just quit." Now, was it Bill Clinton who was president at the time? If this Republican Supreme Court
I
justice
believe
decided to
so. Yeah.
quit, that means you're going to lose a member of the court that's Republican. It's going to be replaced by Bill Clinton, and it's going to be a Democrat. So people were freaking out a little bit. The problem is you can't just go to Congress and say, "Yeah, let's double the Supreme Court justices' income." That may not have even been enough. So then all of a sudden,
Right.
shortly thereafter, we get all these billionaires being sugar daddies to the Supreme Court justices. And it's as if Congress has said, "Well, we can't pay you more or pay you enough. So we're going to hook you up with these sugar daddies and they'll feed you the money." And then, of course, Thomas stayed. Everything got wonderful for Clarence Thomas. He got a fucking $250,000 RV, all kinds of trips. That's a big problem, not only because Clarence Thomas is accepting bribes, but Congress clearly is facilitating it. That's a fucking Pandora's box that's going to open up.
Yeah, and suddenly Jim and Jenny Thomas has this whole lobbying thing going,
Right.
that she's making money on too. And don't tell me that was an accident or that was something that she created. No, that was something that they created for her.
Right. 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 This woman, I don't even know if she's a bright woman. Everything I've heard her say just sounds crazy. Uh, the thing
Yes.
about Jenny Thomas, she's in the Trump-la-fuck cult right now. But I don't know if you remember the story. There's some video of her when she was in front of Congress because she was caught up in another cult back in the 80s. She was a member of a cult
Yes.
and spoke in front of Congress. This woman has a propensity of being sucked into cults, and she clearly is not only sucked into the cult of the Trump-la-fucks, she's one of the leaders. She's one of the upper
Yes.
echelon of the Trump-la-fucks because she's telling Donald Trump what to do and she's setting shit up. She is probably, if I was to take all of the members of Congress that are tied into the insurrection, I would say she's far more guilty than any of those fucks. She did more stuff. She was more involved. I don't think there's any question about it.
Oh no, none at all. And all they would have to do is follow the money. And I mean, she was, as you mentioned earlier, she was instrumental in getting people there, running buses to bring people to the Capitol on January 6th and previous to that. Uh, and she's talking to Mark Meadow about how they've got. She was so out there. She thought Biden and others were already in Guantanamo and all of this kind of crap. She was very into the Q thing, obviously.
Yeah. And the thing is, the people who got sucked into the Q thing, there was no evidence, there's no source, there's nothing. The only reason they got sucked into this is because it fed into their agenda. And that's what
Yeah,
Donald Trump does and all the Republicans do. They hear something and go, yeah, that's right. That proves what I'm saying, even though they don't check into it at all. And that was their fatal flaw because when it comes down to it, like the election fraud claims and stuff, there's no substance to it. So if they have to fight for it, they're going to lose every time because it's just superficial. It's not real.
right. Exactly. All we can hope is that things keep going, that the Supreme Court goes ahead, accepts the immunity question, rules against Trump, and at that point, the floodgates open, in my opinion, and the cases all proceed, and he goes to jail.
Yeah, I don't think there's any. I think I'm a firm believer in destiny. I've said that before. I think we're on a track now that's unavoidable. As much as people want to throw hurdles in there and say, "Oh, if this happens, it's Armageddon." I think we're on the right track now, and it's just going to go south for Donald Trump. The question is he still going to be the nominee? I don't know how he survives the next year up to the election with all that's hit him and all that's yet to come. No normal human being could keep standing under those kinds of pressures.
Yeah, Trump is either going to jail or he's going to go rejoin Ivana to Bedminster Golf.
I don't even know if he can do that
Uh,
because now this lawsuit is ended. We're going to get an answer to this lawsuit in New York less than 30 days from now, and once that happens, he's fucked. He's just like they'll say, "Well, I'm going to appeal this," but okay, you can appeal it, but the fact of the matter is, you got to put up a bond in order to appeal it.
yeah,
Rudy's got to put like up 10 or
yeah,
20% of the 148 million. Well, there
yeah,
was some talk that Letitia James has inkled the fact that, well, 250 million is where we started, and that she's now thinking more like 400 million. Well,
yeah.
Ruby and Shea were only asking for 20 to 40, and they got 148. So the idea that Donald Trump would be fined even bigger isn't out of the realm of possibility, especially since Donald Trump has only done everything he can to antagonize the one motherfucker that's going to make that decision, the judge.
Exactly. So we will see
We will
what we will see.
yeah, we'll
and
definitely.
and I this is a turning point for the country,
I think
right
so.
up there with 1860. This is 1859. Come back again in a way. I the homosexuals who inhabit the dark, fringe area around Trump. I mean, some of them may try to make some noise or something, but that's what we have a military for. And I think they'll soon learn their weekend in the forest kind of shenanigans don't hold up against a Huey with a machine gun on the side of it.
No.
I think they'll learn quickly that their Civil War bullshit is nothing but that.
Yeah.
And that it will not amount to much. And just like it'll be like when you if you live in one of those seedy apartments like we did when we were in college, or just starting out in radio, and you walk into the kitchen at midnight to get a glass of water, and you flip on the light and the roaches all go running under the sink. That's
Wow.
what you're going to see here not too long after Trump goes down. You're
Yeah.
going to see the roaches running for under the sink, and then you go call the exterminator to go after them and pick them off and just fumigate. That's what we're
Absolutely.
going to have to do. We're going to have to fumigate the country, starting with Congress.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're going to wrap things up, but you pointed out something, the Trump Levucks had these hats and these shirts that said 1776. We need to get some
Mm-hmm.
merch that says 1859 on that and watch the fucking Republicans get confused as hell. Oh, I got what the fuck do they mean about that? I got to check that out. Yeah. So
Yeah, well,
1859.
maybe it should be 18. Maybe it should be 1865 because that's when we won, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point too. That's worth talking about. All right. Well, Ed, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's always entertaining. It's always educational, and it's always easier for me because I don't have to carry the whole burden. I like to unburden to my guest, especially you, because I know you're capable of handling the burden. You had my burden for 20 plus years on the radio, so this is nothing new to you.
Yeah, I've been carrying you my whole life.
There you go. There you go. And when you don't, my wife does. So that's good. All right. Well,
There you go. Yeah,
th thank you for coming on. We'll talk to you next week. And for those of you listening,
you bet.
I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen. Hope you have a great day. And of course, we will talk to you again tomorrow.